Hey everyone. Um, we're just going to pick up where we left off, but before we do so, I just want to make sure we get everybody back on track. So, before we left, before break, we started talking about where law comes from, and we spent some time talking about our manners, our rules, and our laws. And I'm certainly not going to go through all these again. And then we went into talking about where laws originated from, and we talked about Hammurabi's Code. We talked about the Ten Commandments, how we use the Greek system of jury trials and put that into our system. And we spent some time talking about common law and case law and how not all laws come out of um, the legislative branch. So, the next thing we went into before break is we talked about different levels of laws. We talked about how in our system we have national laws, state laws, local laws that we have to follow. And we said that national laws apply anywhere in this map. We see that there are no lines for states, but federal law doesn't see that. They just see the country. Therefore, all laws apply equally to anything in blue. Then we talked about state laws, and that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time this term talking. And then we said that there are also city laws, ordinances that we need to follow. We spent a little bit of time talking about the map in the back of the room, and we went through and talked about the different branches of government, the legislative, the executive, judicial, and how they all play into law. And so we talked about how national law applies anywhere. We call them acts. State laws are only within the state. So the minute you go out of a state, you're on a different set of laws. Those are called statutes. And then we talk about city governments and ordinances. And then we spent quite a bit of time before break talking about how is it possible that some states have legalized recreational use marijuana, and then in Minnesota, for example, we've legalized it, but we could still have drug enforcement agents from the federal government come in and arrest people who are legally purchasing what they consider to be illegal substances. And so then we went through and we talked about the Controlled Substance Act of 1970. And we talked about how Schedule 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, the smaller the number, the higher the potential for abuse. By the time you get to Schedule 1 drugs, there's no medical use acceptable for any of these drugs. And it's very likely that someone will become or there's a very high chance that someone could become abusive of that drug and become dependent on it. And so we spent a little bit of time talking about not only the federal uh, Controlled Substance Act, but how Minnesota now has legalized marijuana. We also tied this a lot to the war on drugs starting in the 1970s, and how by the time we get into the late 70s into Ronald Reagan's term, we started to see the increase in our federal prison population. And much of it, not all of it, but much of it had to do with the war on drugs. So, moving forward, what I want to cover today is the purpose of laws. And there's going to be a number of things I'm going to have you put down in your notes. Um, if you feel that I'm going too fast, you can ask our guest teacher to pause it so you can get this down. If not, you can go back on this recording because I will put it into Schoology for you. So, what we're moving on to now is what is the purpose of laws? Um, I think a lot of people think it's there to restrict our choices and to make life a little bit more difficult and to make us more accountable or whatever the case is. But I think the best way to look at what is the purpose of law is to look at what society looks like without laws in the first place. So I want to just show this quick movie, and I hope it works as I produce this, because sometimes if it is on YouTube it doesn't come through. So we're going to hope that this works. So we're just going to watch a little bit of what does society look like without laws.
Throw away your old pillow right now, because what you're about to hear in this
world had no laws? It's a pretty interesting question, to say the least. Basically, the world as we know it would cease to exist. Laws have been around since the beginning of time. There might be short periods of time where a society is not governed by law, but for the most part, every historical period had them. Law is a system of rules, enforced through a set of institutions. Law is a system that regulates and ensures that individuals or a community adhere to the will of a state. Each state lays out their main laws in their constitutions. But what if there were no laws? In 350 BC, Aristotle said, "The rule of law is better than the rule of any individual." Without laws, people that are normally needed to make society function wouldn't go to work. There would be no one paying taxes to the government, so there would be no government programs that take care of things like garbage. Essentially, the street would become one big dump. There would be no sewage or water supplies because there would be no government agency making sure water supplies are safe for drinking. At the same time, there would be no one keeping criminals in jail. Murderers and rapists would be free and living amongst us. For a time, it would be complete and utter anarchy. If no one went to work, then no one would be delivering the essential needs for life. If there was no means to get people food, medicine, or other goods, the economy would collapse. Depending on where people live, the effect of an economic collapse would be different. When the economy collapsed in Argentina in 2001, and after it recovered, the government found evidence of people who were trying to survive in rural areas, but many of those people were found dead in their bunkers, their supplies looted, and their defenses struggling to keep away criminals and gangs. In a world without laws, people would be forced to grow their own food and keep livestock, but then what's to stop people from stealing that food and livestock? Not much. Private farms would have to be well protected to prevent thefts. Those who do manage to steal from these private farmers would sell the food at outrageous prices. The problem of finding food would be even worse in cities. People who live in cities rely on imports from airports, highways, harbors, and railways, which wouldn't be functioning in a society without laws. So how would people who lived in cities get their food? Simple. They wouldn't. For a time, people would raid abandoned stores for supplies, and this would sustain people for a time, but not forever. Let's not forget that going out in public in a society without laws is dangerous. People would live out their days in hiding and only come out at night under cover of darkness to look for food. But accessible food that isn't being replenished would run out eventually, especially if everyone was taking it and fighting for it. After there was no food left, mass starvation would occur. Similarly, shops and stores can't operate in a society where everyone is armed and looking to steal things. For this reason, most shopping would have to be done online. But then, many thefts would still take place. How could items be delivered if there were no laws? People would still need to work, to package and deliver items, but without laws preventing them from stealing, what would stop them from doing so? Nothing. Most people probably wouldn't go to work in the first place. Essentially, without laws, a society can't function. There would be no police or courts to enforce those laws. Hospitals would become very dangerous places. For this reason, many people would have basic medical training in case of an accident or attack occurs. In a society without laws, everyone would have combat training and be armed with weapons because there would be no one to protect civilians. Essentially, in this world, guns would rule, and whoever had the most guns would be the leader. Just because there are no laws, that doesn't mean there wouldn't be a hierarchy and some sort of social structure. People would break off into tribes because they are seeking peace, but the strongest, most powerful, and most feared would become the leaders of those tribes. Mafias and criminal organizations would hold the most power. They already operate without fear of repercussion. Imagine what life would be like if there were no laws. In exchange for some form of taxes, the leader of these tribes would provide protection and food. In some way, there would still be laws, but they would be crafted by those most powerful. There would be no rational justice, and repercussions for breaking the rule of law would be much harsher. If you stole from someone, for example, the consequences would be torture or even death. At the same time, the weak people in a society would be the most vulnerable. I'm talking about the sick and the elderly, who would most likely be left behind to die. In a lawless society, everyone fends for themselves. One can't afford to take care of someone who's sick or old when you can barely take care of yourself. For the most part, people don't want to be living in fear all the time. Some sort of structure would take shape because social order is necessary for survival. What do you think would happen if the world had no laws? Let us know in those comments.
I mean, it's a legitimate question. When we I wouldn't want to be in a society like that. I mean, I can't imagine living in society like that. I'm going to see if I can find one other video to show you what this looks like. Okay, so when we talk about society with no laws, it's kind of weird to think that, you know, could that really happen here? I'm going to try to get this to come in a little closer. It probably won't come in a little closer, but I just wanted to show you this one.
Surveillance video catches the wild moments of smash and grab robberies using a car to bust in. 2 sporting goods stores were broken into within just an hour apart on Wednesday. The suspects appeared to go straight for the gun department, but to no success, the cases remain locked. So far, no arrests have been made.
And there's this. I mean, going back to this, that's what happens when people don't see laws as applying to them. You know, if we lived in a society where everyone respected each other's space, we wouldn't need any of this. But that's not society that we live in. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start looking at what is the purpose of law? What is it? What is it good for? So the top of this law, or the top of this slide, is going to stay the same. So when we look at law, the purpose of law is to control behavior. Okay? So people who say laws are only there to manipulate what I can and cannot do, they're absolutely correct. That is the purpose of law, is to control behavior. But why do we need to control behavior? And this is the answer right here, is to protect. Okay? So we're going to go through 4 different areas where the law protects, and we're going to look at a number of examples. And so as I go through these, I'm going to ask that you write some of these examples down. So let's start with the first one, if this would work. All right. So the first one is that the government controls behavior so that everyone is protected individually. So I'm protected from you and vice versa, but also the law protects me, oddly, from me. So let's take a look at some examples. So some of the areas where we've seen laws created to protect individuals is when we look at sexual assault. As tough of a topic as this is, I'm thankful that these laws exist because they protect me from somebody else thinking they can control my body in some way or abuse me in some way. We take for granted, I think, that this one exists, but like I said, when we look at why do we have laws, we have to go back and look at what society would look like without them. And so one video I've shown in the past is a trailer from The Purge, where no laws exist for, 12 hours, 24 hours, I don't know. And at one point I had a student who said that would be so cool if this one in particular were legal, because I could go out and kill anybody and I wouldn't have to worry about being in trouble for it. And the class kind of looked at him oddly, and I looked at him and I said, you do realize that you wouldn't be the only one with that. Everybody else would be able to do the same thing, and anyone else could do that to you. And he thought for a second and he said, well, I don't want anyone else killing me. I said, well, then we're lucky that we have this. I can't imagine society without this one. Just like we saw in the smash and grabs. We are protected from somebody robbing us and taking what belongs to us with the use of force. Whether it's with a weapon or not, it's still protecting us as individuals. We look at this one, and I'll move the the picture a little bit here. This is one of those where it protects me from me. Okay. Human beings, as historians and philosophers have pointed out, are not always the brightest people in the world or the brightest beings in the world. Sometimes we make choices that bring harm to us. And when I make a decision that I can control what goes into my body, sometimes it's not in understanding that the effects of what I have consumed could put me in a position where I actually harm other individuals. So there's this domino effect that happens here. Let me see. Let's keep going. We have one of assault here. Just can't go around and, assault people because you feel like it. Gun laws, and that smash and grab that we just watched. Luckily, that store that they had broken into literally with their car, that state has laws, or that store had protections where the glass to those gun cases was actually bulletproof, because if it wasn't, then that whole case of guns could have been stolen, and then there are illegal guns out on the streets. So who can have these? Is there a background check? Just the idea of having serial numbers on guns is a law that we're for protection. And it's not just protection of you, it's protection of everybody. And it goes back to this whole idea, the good of society. Kidnapping and abduction, another protection. I mean, this is just touching on the surface. This by no means is an inclusive list. This is just a touching the surface. All right, so the next category that we're going to look at, again, same idea, purpose of laws to control behavior for the good of society and to protect, oops, that's not what I wanted, property. Okay, we want our things protected as well. Protects us from others destroying our property. I mean, again, going back to that smash and grab, not only did they rob the place, they destroyed the place. They went in and stole property, but in doing so, they also trashed that property. It protects our finances. November, I had my credit card number stolen. Okay? It's not an easy process to get out of that. So how that happened, I had to go back and change my number. I had to get a hold of the credit card company to make sure that the charges that were being put on my card, I wasn't being charged with. So again, the laws are out there to protect others from taking things that belong to me. Laws that protect a store. Where did I hear it? There was an individual who said shoplifting is not a big deal because insurance companies or these stores have insurance. And so if somebody goes in and steals something from a store, the store will just get the insurance company to pay for it. And so it's not really a big loss. And I think we need to look at the domino effects of that one. When people are shoplifting from stores, correct, it's likely that they'll take a loss on that. And yes, some stores probably have some pretty big insurances on their goods that they sell, but not all stores can tap into an insurance to pay for things that are stolen. And so when things get stolen and the company starts losing money, there's a couple of things they can do. One is they can close. And so any employees that happen to be working there are out jobs. But a lot of times what happens when things are stolen from stores is they will increase the cost of what they're selling. And so it's not necessarily the store, or the store may take a hit from what they've lost, but it's everybody else that goes in and buys something from the store that's also paying for the fact that people just go in and think that they can take what they want. So it's not just as easy as saying, oh, it's, that store will just put in for the insurance and get the money back anyway. That's not the case. Who normally gets hurt in the end are the other consumers who are following the law and paying for the things that they're taking out of a particular store. Good thing. That's a picture of an arson. You can't just go up to somebody's property and light it on fire. That's probably a good thing. Protecting us not only in physical, but also what we see. A lot of people now have the Ring doorbells. And why do they have Ring doorbells? Is they want to see who's on their property. Those Ring doorbells are actually becoming a key component in crime solving, because they are not only there to survey the property of that homeowner, but they actually catch other things that are happening in a community. You can't just decide you're going to go into somebody's property. So again, not all inclusive, but it gives us an idea of areas where the law is there to protect us, and without it, everything we own is up for grabs, in some cases quite literally. All right, the third category is laws. The purpose of law is to control our behavior to protect our institutions. Now, a lot of times we don't think of this, that laws are there so that there are organizations. Well, let's just look at a few. I'm really glad that this one exists. So one of our institutions is our medical institution. And we have laws out there that protect our medical privacy. And when I go to the doctor, it's not every time I go to the doctor, but I think it's on an annual basis, the clinic has to provide me their HIPAA information and how they handle my medical information, and that my employer can't just contact my doctor and ask if there are any medical issues they should be aware of. So again, without that, it's one of those deals where if I said an employer is looking into somebody's medical background without their permission, many people would go, well, that's not fair, or they can't do that. You're correct. They can't, because the law stops them. Education. If the laws didn't exist in our society around education, I'm not certain what would happen to society as a whole. The fact that you are educated makes you a more productive member of society. And if we don't have laws that require students to go to school, or require people to have 18 or 12 years of education, or meet certain requirements, you have to be able to have a certain level of reading and writing abilities. Why? Think of what society would look like if nobody could read or write, or there's problems when we get into that. If there's a group of people that have educated, could they abuse those that are not educated? And our society and our government says we don't want that. We want everybody to be on an even level. So when we're on people, on our students, that you need a high school diploma that gives you the equality and the basis that our government expects of our society. We have the institution of our government leaders, okay? Those that are elected, and I think one of them that will come up here is elections, but the idea that those we do elect and put into office, there are laws that protect them. I'm just looking at these pictures. We have a law that says you can't threaten the life of the president, and for good reason. It just amazes me. I'm going to actually see if I can find a video here for 1 second, because I want to show one of the current events that's happening around this issue. Okay, so the video that I'm going to show you is the Secretary of State from Maine. Over the holiday, she was a victim of swatting. And we kind of talked about swatting before. the idea that people are calling in anonymous threats, where they say there's a group of people that are going to go to this house and they're going to try to kill this person. Um, and so I'm going to see if this works here for just 1 second. Now, some people will look at this and say, okay, so what's the background to this? Maine just recently made a decision that Donald Trump will not be on the ballot for the Maine primary elections that are starting here in a couple of months. This is not for the November election. This is a whole different process of the election proceedings. But they have decided in Maine that Donald Trump was part of an insurrection back on January 6, 2021, and therefore, due to the 14th Amendment, he is disqualified from being on the primary ballot. And as the Secretary of State in that state, she oversees elections. And so she's being targeted as having made that decision by herself. And so this is her response to a swatting incident that took place to her personally after this decision was made in Maine.
If you disagree with a law that delegates this authority to the Secretary of State, there's a process in the legislature to change the law. But to target me, my family, and the people around me, including the people that work with me, with these abusive and threatening communications, with swatting, it's wrong, it's dangerous, and it needs to stop. I really call on people, everyone, we all have friends and family. Let's bring back respect and civility. We can agree to disagree without threats of violence.
Okay. And so the idea of her saying, this threats of violence, and she says, if you don't agree with the rights that were given to me by law to make a decision of this nature, then there's a process of creating law to take that power away from her. Do we agree with what she did or not? That's not even the point here. The point of it being, it's illegal to make threats. And sending a threat, whether it's a bomb threat or a violent threat or the threat of killing someone, that's illegal. And again, goes back to protecting us. Because when, say, for example, that incident, the police in that area all went to this location because there was a threat that there was going to be a mass shooting there, blah, blah, blah. So all the police go to this area, all their focus is on this area. Now, if something legitimately happens in another part of that state or that town, the police are already in a different location. So it may look like, well, she had it coming, she made this decision. Correct. By law, she had the right to make that decision. But to take emergency resources and throw them in a different location, that becomes an issue. All right, so moving on. Civil rights, an institution we, again, probably don't think of on a daily basis. But the idea that no matter what our gender, our race, our sexual orientation is, we all have legal rights to be treated equally. And that is by law. Again, why do we have law? To protect us. The idea of a division between church and state, even though that there is not a clear line between church and state, we have a system that is set up to respect religion, no question, and I can't imagine a society that doesn't. But to have religion run government or government run religion, that's where our framers and our founders said that's not something we want, and it's been part of our law since. Now, there are times where we have a blurry line between the two, but that's where our courts come in and decide where does that line about the law exist. Again, going back and protecting our property. Thank goodness we have an institution of banking that protects our money. The institution of marriage, the institution of being able to choose who one spends their life with on a legal status. And again, marriage here, if you look at this definition, is legally united. Marriage in the United States can be religious, but by definition in the United States, marriage is a legal commitment, a legal uniting of two people. And here we have this institution of religion. The idea that any one of these religions is legal in the United States. We can't say that any one of these isn't legitimate, okay? Or that everyone has to follow a specific faith in the United States. That doesn't exist. And as I said, the elections. The idea that elections are regulated. And we hear a lot in our news lately, or for the last couple of years, that there is fraud in elections, that elections are being stolen. And we've seen challenges to the 2020 election being brought into the courts. And so, was it stolen? Was it not stolen? Well, that's where our courts come in and determine based on evidence, and that is all set forth, luckily, by law. And the last one, I'm actually going to take a break here because I think this is a good place to stop on this, and I will come back and create an entirely new video on this last category.